Hey everybody, it's Romania Black, and we are on episode 10 of The Great Pretender. And I couldn't wait. I watched episode 9 a few days ago, and I was like, I need to know what Abbie is going to do with Lewis. I just need to know. And the con with Sam and Makoto and all them is getting crazier, and I don't think that the case is going to end this episode. I think it's going to reach its climax this episode or get to it, but then I think it's going to go one more episode. I think it's going to be to episode 11, which would kind of make sense if we're talking about like splitting the season into two cores. We have 2 cases and then 2 cases. We talked about the last episode how it could spread out, but I don't know. I don't feel like I feel like we're going to be resolving or bringing some kind of climax to the situation with Abigail and Lewis, and then I feel like we're going to be touching on stuff happening with Makoto and Sam and Clark and Laurent and Cynthia. So I don't know. And Isabel's included in all this. Where's her place in it? So I don't know. But last episode was really good and a really like sobering look into Abigail and her past and why she has this hatred towards Lewis. And it's crazy, right? So I woke up this morning and was like, yes, it is time to watch The Great Pretender. So I couldn't wait. I know y'all have some amazing comments to come, but what can we do? So before we start though, I do want to thank the philanthropy tier on Patreon. Patreon is very supportive of not only me just rambling for fun about these shows, but also for helping me to support the streaming services that I use, buying the manga, buying the Blu-ray of DVDs for the anime, and things to support the official release and the official authors. And also just to support me and be incredibly kind and generous. So I thank you all so much from the bottom of my heart. It really is impressive how wonderful you all are. So those in our philanthropy tier, I've given even more on top of what other patrons give for my channel. And so I want to give a special shout out to those amazing individuals. So thank you, Edgar. Thank you, Dana. Thank you, Larry Manning. Thank you, Anime Annie. And thank you, Truck. You all are wonderful and all of my love. So with that being said, I woke up this morning. I have to go to work a little bit later today than usual. So I was like, you know what? I could sit around and watch some reality trash TV before I go to work, or I could watch The Great Pretender. So that's where we are. But I hope you all enjoy. I'm really excited, but we are going to start episode 10 of The Great Pretender. And we're going to do that here in 3, 2, 1. And let's do this. Oh. I was in this weird limbo because there was a part of me that was like, are they going to finish this case this episode? Because it would seem, we talked about in the last reaction how we could set up this series where we had 5 episodes towards understanding Edamura and doing the first case. We could do 5 episodes for Abigail and her thing, then do 5 for Cynthia, 5 for Laurent, and then have 5 episodes at the end to tie them all together. And that's where I thought it was, which would mean we would need to end Abigail's case this episode to keep with that trend. But I was like, I don't know how they could do it. Surprisingly well. Surprisingly well. I'm sure that there are some people that feel like this episode was very rushed or ended kind of abruptly. And I do see that because I really honestly thought we were going to build it up a lot more. But you know, it all kind of adds up. The only thing I really am a little bit more regretful for is that we didn't spend more time with Lewis and Abigail. But there's a part of me that feels like we could have spent much more time with them. I don't know. I feel like we could have spent more time with their characters and their dilemma and them talking. But then again, Abigail and Lewis are 2 characters that are not like Makoto and Laurent and Cynthia. Abigail is a woman of very little words, and Lewis seems to be the same way. So it's sort of like a what if scenario. If we had spent another episode and we'd spent this one just them talking out, would we have really gotten to the bottom of things, or would they have just made each other mad and tried to go at each other's throat again? I think it would have been the latter. So I'm not sure if it would have panned out well anyway. So I am kind of glad that This show does a lot of show not tell, where we've seen Abigail watching Lewis this whole time. We've seen her listening to the conversations. We saw her listen to Makoto and Isabel's conversation. So even though we don't get to internally see Abigail's inner thoughts, we get to see her hearing all the stuff we hear as the audience. We know her personality. And so we can kind of, as an audience, make an assumption of how she processes things and can come to that conclusion that whether or not she truly forgave him, she did accept that there's nothing she can do to change what's happened. And I'm glad that we get a little bit more on his character and his perspective, honestly, from Isabel when she talks to Edamura. I'm glad we got that, because I was reading kind of in between the lines, and then it becomes more apparent when we get to his character, and it's like, okay, got it. We've got how this is going down, right? But man, whew, I did not anticipate Lewis being able to get out of the chair, honestly. I thought he was bound in that, but when we find out from Isabel later, he's been doing rehabilitation without telling her, because he's trying to there's a fine and delicate balance between Abigail and Lewis and how they feel about living. And it's kind of one of those things. It actually reminds me a lot of Vinland Saga. Oddly enough, I'm watching Vinland Saga right now, and it reminds me a lot of that. The idea that when these horrible, horrific things happen in your past, what do you do? And in Vinland Saga, without spoiling anything, there is a character that goes through like some horrific stuff, and they just don't seem to find the will to live. And then they encounter these other characters that are like, no, your body wants to live. It wants to keep going. It's just you overcoming this hurdle, right? So yeah, it's something, y'all. But I really do like that we get the similarities between Lewis and Abigail, and Lewis and her both being like, they both think that they want to die. They think that they don't want to be here anymore, but then they keep going. So it's just him being able to walk and being able to like grab the knife with her and then telling her, and he says, and what he tells her, at first I was like, man, whew, because he says, I was just doing my job. And there is an aspect of that he was in the army and this is what he was told to do. And we find out later that when he came out of the army, he wasn't in a good place mentally at all. Like, he probably did regret a lot of the things he did. He doesn't tell Abigail in the moment that because he wants her to kill him, right? He thinks that that's her way of atoning and moving on, is to kill him. And he's accepted death at this point. So he doesn't tell her that. But then when Isabel says later, she's like, yeah, he had a lot of regrets coming out of the army. It's like, read between the lines. He wasn't happy with what he did. We, the audience, don't hear him physically say it, but it's implied by what she tells Makoto. And Abigail hears that, so she can put two to two together, right? I like that this show, and I'm sure it frustrates some people because we could have had this big, sappy confession by Lewis to Abigail and, violins play and everything. But this show it's mainly about the cons and the mystery behind it and the setup. This stuff is a lot heavier subject matter in this case being thrown at us, but the show respects us as the audience to be able to read between the lines and to put two and two together and figure things out for ourselves. This is what they mean. This is what's being said and not said, but is being implied. And I think the show does a very good job with that. So I'm happy about that. But yeah, he basically tells her, he's like, I was doing my job. And so, but a lot of things he says here, he says, I didn't see anything worth resenting. And he's like, all I did was drop a big shit from the sky. And he's just egging her on because he wants her to kill him. And Abigail, Makoto stepping up and like tackling her. I'm like, dude, she could have made you a pincushion. And Makoto's like, ah! But that's our boy Ed. Ed's like, he's like, I don't want to see anybody die. He's like, that's not it. And then Isabel, he's like, you tell her. She'll be free once she kills me. Isn't that what she wants? And Isabel, that look she gives him, she's like, come on now. She's like, I won't let that happen. Yeah, so it's just, Lewis and Abigail both think the same things. They're like, they both feel like dying is the only way to get out of their pain. But I think both of them realize that's not really the case, but they don't want to admit it. And And the fact that Abigail doesn't pursue it, once Isabel and Makoto show up and stop her once, she doesn't pursue it, right? So I feel like even she realizes it's not going to change anything. Her killing Lewis will not bring her family back. It won't change the situation. It won't change how she feels. And she knows that, but she's got all this emotion. She doesn't exactly know what to do with it. And so it's her trying to like come to terms with things throughout this episode. And I almost wish we could have got some Makoto swim with Clark time. Makoto's like, he'll swim with the ladies. He ain't swimming with Clark, right? I just love Makoto's like, no, I didn't bring swim trunks. I don't swim in the nude, right? And Clark's like, why not? Abigail did. I do like at the end of this that they have built up Clark's character. And Sam is corrupt, definitely. Sam is definitely a toxic, corrupt person. But Clark, he's a himbo, you know? And I do like the fact that we find out that Lewis was like one of his mentors and that Clark and him always wanted to race genuinely against one another to see who was genuinely better. And Clark finally convinced Lewis to not let it be rigged. And then the accident, Clark feels responsible for it. And then it was satisfying. I will say it was satisfying to see Lewis like strangling Sam for everything that he was doing. It was satisfying to see that. It's like, yeah, he gets major comeuppance by the end of this, but oh my God. But yeah, seeing Clark recognize Lewis as a mentor and somebody he respected and that he feels guilt for what happened to him, that was really good. All Sam cares about, Sam doesn't care about the well-being of Lewis, of Abigail, of Clark, anybody. He just wants his money back. He's like, bitch better have my money. And he's like, I need a plan to get my $2.5 million back. And Makoto's like, why don't you just apologize and get back in the casino? Why do you still have to depend upon me? And Sam at first tells me, he's like, well, that's dumb. We're not going to do that. And Makoto's like, oh my God. Like, what? I like that a lot, right? I like that Makoto is trying to, for being a swindler and being a con man, Makoto is like the most genuine and kind-hearted of all of them. Because he's trying to be like, Sam, you do you. I don't want to be responsible for your actions. I want this to be all on you. And it ends up being all on him, which I kind of like. I like that it ends up being Sam's own undoing by his own hand. Because Makoto tries to fish out some information about Lewis. And what works about this scene is that at the pool is that Makoto has been set up as being a former mechanic of Lewis's. So him asking Sam about Lewis doesn't seem suspicious because he's like, I was his mechanic. So naturally, he would be concerned about him. And he knows Isabel because he was his mechanic. So everything that's been set up so far, it all is there's no plot holes there. It all just runs together. It's like, cool. That connects with that. That connects with that. Everything logically makes sense. And he's like, didn't Lewis follow your script? And that's when he like avoids the subject and decides to get Clark in on it. Clark is such a handsome dude. I think that helps his character a lot. In the most shallow of ways is that he's just a handsome guy. But Clark does have a good personality. And meanwhile, on the phone, Sam is talking to Cynthia, and we get little context clues about that because we see him saying annoying old hag, calling Cynthia the old hag. We get all that context clues. That's great, right? And then he's like, did he go easy on you in the races? And Clark being like, Clark is so nostalgic about it. He says, yes, but we were almost able to have a real race together. I like that how nostalgic Clark is and him just acknowledging, like, I really wanted to race him. And then Makoto says, you need to show the team owners that they're not in cahoots. You need to show that the team owners aren't in cahoots with one another. So Makoto, oddly enough, he influences Sam to be like, well, if you bet on your brother winning, then it'll be fine, right? Right? This will all work out, right? If you just bet everything on him. It's funny because it's kind of the opposite of what they thought was going to happen. And the funny thing about all of this is that Laurent, he can't show how he truly feels in the betting room because he doesn't want to give anything away. So he's like, sure, we'll take this 25 million bet on your brother. Sure. But I feel like Laurent was covering his bases because he's like, okay, we're going to have Abigail versus Clark. It can either go one of two ways. Either Abigail will legit win and we're good, we'll have gone by then. Or he's like, Clark will have won and we'll still be gone with the money regardless. So Laurent was planning for her to win either way, because those videos aren't just something you make overnight. Like, Kim has been putting that together with footage from the races this whole time, and she's been editing it. So Laurent planned way back at the start of this that this, no matter what the outcome was, Abbie had to win and they were going to take the money, right? Because he knew in the end that Sam would not bet against his brother. So I was honestly waiting for Sam to figure out that it wasn't Abigail, that it was Lewis, and try to say the race was forfeit and do that and just like say it was a draw. But then that would have outed that his company was maybe not as reputable as they appear to be. But then also, that's what the film and that's what the video was for. So Laurent was covering all bases no matter what the outcome would have been or what would have happened in between. I like that Laurent cannot predict what Makoto is going to do. He just has an idea and he kind of tries to nudge Makoto along, but then when he realizes he's not following, he's like, okay. He's like, we'll just plan for options A, B, and C, and whatever happens, happens. And we'll just let him do his own thing. I like that he doesn't try to control Makoto. He tries to lead him a certain direction, but he leaves it to Makoto to figure out on his own. He's like, I trust you. There is a level of trust there. And there's even the level of trust at the very end when they're on the boat with Cynthia. He's like, oh, they'll find their way back here. And it kind of comes across as him being very cruel. But it's like, no, Laurent trusts Makoto and knows that he'll do good. And so I do like that. I like that it's, again, show, not tell. But yeah, we have Sam apologizing, going back in. He says there's a rumor that I decide who wins the race, but I wouldn't do something so dishonest. Air racing is a unique battle where you bet your life. Laurent has such a good poker face. Such a good poker face. Like, you don't even, he's just stone faced that whole time. I'm like that is the one mystery about Laurent, is that we don't know what he's thinking. Ever. And it's like, oh my God, like you're constantly left in a state of mystery of being like, well, what's going on? What are you thinking? What's happening in your brain, Laurent? And we don't know. He says, my love for racing is the same as yours. So he says he has Cynthia bet, what does he say there? When he comes in, he sees Cynthia and he says, I'm asked Cynthia to bet $100,000 on Abigail. Will that gain their trust? It might not give enough credibility. He's like, but you're a big customer, and if you bring a lot of money, they're sure to let you in. So he's like, they're just as greedy as you are. If you bring the cash, no matter what happens, they're gonna let you in because they want the money just like you. He's like, Makoto has banked this entire case on the fact that Sam thinks him and Makoto are kind of the same mindset when they're really not. And so Makoto's like, sure. He's like, these people at the casino are no different than you and I. If you bring the cash, they're going to let you play. Like, one of those situations. So, and it works. Hook, line, and sinker it gets him. I love just how confident Sam is. And we have the 1-9 and 2-3 bets. 1-1 is the casino's lowest odds if you want that $2.5 million back. And so they're like, does he really have all that money? And again, Abigail is in the foreground this entire time listening, right? But we don't see her face. He's like, if he uses his managerial rights as collateral, and then it's the mechanic's turn after that. So what's funny about this is that she says it's a cheap trick, but it's most likely to work. I feel that Laurent and Cynthia know Makoto well enough by this point to know he wasn't going to use the capsule because he's never looked comfortable with it, right? And Makoto said he doesn't like drugs. So even though this is kind of like a drug for a plane, right? So I feel like they gave it to him as a last resort, being like, if you can't figure out an alternate strategy to make this work in our favor, here's your out. You can use this if all else fails. But I feel that Cynthia and Laurent didn't expect him to use the capsule. I think that was the case. I would like to think that they didn't expect him to use it. Because as soon as they gave him that capsule, I'm like, he is not going to use that. Because he spent all this time with Abigail and Clark and Lewis, and is like, no, we need to have a legit race. I honestly thought he was going to have Abigail and Clark race for real. And I thought Abigail was legit going to win. That's how I thought it was going to go down. I thought he was going to be like, no, Abigail's going to win with her sheer willpower alone. But it's such a cool twist that it's Lewis that races. That's the cool twist, that Lewis gets to get back in the plane because that's what he wants. He's like, it's most likely to work. And yeah, Makoto, he's like, just doesn't seem very apt on it. And Laurent says, our cleanup time's a little tight, but it's the perfect plan otherwise. He's like, we're not going to have a lot of time to get out of here, but, you know. And he says, you need to go check on Lewis and Isabel. And honestly, it's funny because Makoto says, I'll go check. You stay here and relax, Abbie. Cynthia and Laurent didn't know about anything going on between Abigail, Lewis, and Makoto this whole time. Or they didn't seem to know anything that was going on. And I kind of like that. I like that this whole end of this case is like a little private connection between Makoto and Abigail. It's like their little tie-in, how they both, you know, connect with one another at the end of all things. I like that. I like it's something personal between the two of them. And Laurent and Cynthia are kind of off to the side about it. I like that. I like that kind of character building that we get in this episode. And you know that Abbie follows, right? She follows, and when he meets up with Isabel and is listening the whole time. So the finals being in 3 days. So that's another context clue for us, because I know some people will probably think, myself included, I was like, man, it rushed us to the conclusion. But there were 3 days. So Abigail's had 3 days to work out what she wants to do and how she feels about it, which again is not a lot of time, but it's not like just the next day she was like okay with Lewis. No, she's been thinking about this for a bit. And Isabel asking, what is this? I love the scenery, the animation and cinematography in this series is really well, but I love that just that circle, right? The circle of life with the foliage and everything, and it cutting to the gazebo that they're under. And Makoto saying, I can understand why Lewis doesn't mind dying. With that body, it's no wonder. And I don't want to be ableist in this, but I do think what Makoto's saying is that based on what Lewis has been doing his whole life, suddenly not being able to do something that brings him joy and passion would be extremely depressing and difficult to deal with, right? Because I thought Isabel had met Lewis through the air race. But no, she's been with him since before then, back when he got out of the army. So their relationship runs a lot deeper than I originally thought. And she says that he was a completely different person after returning from the Middle East, which means she was with him before he went to the Middle East. That's the thing. She's been with him for a long time. And so she says that being over there changed him. And that after leaving the army, she suggested that he get a normal job. But he chose to do aerobatics as an air show pilot of all things. So yeah, there's that like thrill-seeking aspect of him like Abigail, and she hears this. Though through that he worked as Clark's advisor and was scouted by Sam. And he really liked flying. She says then he had the accident, and I haven't seen him smile since. And she says his smile, he was always looking at the sky. Because yeah, that's the thing. Flying for him, when he got out of the army, it's very, very likely that he had regrets, that he was a changed person, that he just wasn't in the same mindset as he was before. And so I like that they do touch upon this idea of when people out of military try to reintegrate into a non-military culture and society, it's very difficult. And Abigail's gone through that. And so we see for him, she was like, get a normal job. But for him, it's like with that personality and what he's been through, it's like, what's normal anymore? And so the idea of aerobatics was connecting back. It was connecting back to that lifestyle he'd gotten accustomed to, but there was a whole different parameter with it, right? And him realizing that flying was the one thing that let him have normalcy, the one thing that let him have peace of mind. And then that was taken away from him. So yeah, it all makes sense. It all connects back really, really well, right? And I love that Abigail hears all of this, that she's like, okay. She hears all of it, and Isabel says that he's in rehabilitation without telling me. And so Makoto says, you still like him. And she seems tested by it. She's like, I do still like him, but this whole experience has really tested me. But no, you're right. I loved it when he'd fly in the sky. She's like, I just want him to go back to being the way he was. She's like, I'm never going to be able to forget all the good times we've had. She's like, but it's really hard. And it's trying and testing me because he's not the person that he once was that I had fell in love with. And so, yeah, then we get the whole confrontation with Clark. And I love this. At this point, when he was talking to Clark, I was like, Makoto's not putting the pill in the engine. That's just not going to happen. Because otherwise he could have... The moment he's too loud and clumsy, and it's just like, nah, he's not going to be doing that. He's like, what did you want to talk about? And he's like, don't you want to have a real race? And he's like, I'm always racing for real. And that's the thing. I do think Clark, even though his brother scripts the races, which is sad, I do think that for Clark, it is real. And Clark's like, I'm always racing for real. It's the other people I'm racing against that either aren't or are taking it seriously. And so I like that. I like that Clark's character has been genuine from the start. It's been Sam that's been the one that's kind of corrupted. And Clark asking what it's about, he says it's about the races. No one would get hurt if it's scripted. And then, man, Makoto's not subtle. He's like, well, there was that one where that one guy got hurt, but what's that about? And Clark's saying, I'm bearing the entire race on my back. And Makoto brings up Lewis, and that gets Clark angry. And then him saying that he feels bad about it. He's like, I egged him on for a real race. And he's like, I feel that it was my fault he was injured. Like, Clark taking responsibility, which makes Sam look all the worse because it had been scripted. I do like at that point, Makoto is not gonna injure the plane. We cut back and see Abigail, and she's just kind of thinking about what to do. And then she sees the capsule toys. I love she still calls Makoto a virgin, and that guy looks back at her, and it's like she's talking to him. One thing I loved about this episode is she has the capsule toy. She did end up getting one. And then he says it was dusk last time. And there's this beautiful silence between the two of them. It reminded me instantly of Neon Genesis. If you've watched Neon Genesis Evangelion, one of the best things about that series is there are scenes throughout that anime that are very artistic, stylistic, and sometimes the director and the creator just let the scenes breathe. And there's this unspoken silence between characters that say more than any words could, right? That silence just clears the air and lets the audience be like, okay, here's what we can deduce without any words being spoken. And that's exactly what happens here between Makoto and Abigail. Like they both know what the situation is. They both know that stuff's going down, but like, what do you say? And Makoto's saying, he's like, I don't understand you. I don't understand your situation. I'll never be able to understand your situation. He's like, but what are you going to do about it? He's like, what do we do now? And then he looks at her and says, you're not the only one who's suffering. He's like, yeah, he's like, you're suffering. It's bad. I can't understand it. He's like, but you can't treat it like you're the only one in the world that's suffering. He's like, Lewis is, Makoto has, we assume Cynthia and Laurent are to varying degrees, but he's like, you still have to move forward. I like that Abigail counters him by just like playing it off as a joke. She's like, your accent's so bad. He's like, no. So I love that he's like, get back on track. I love that. And then she asks who the figure is, and he says it's Akechi Mitsuhide. And she asks what he did, and she said the Japanese people treated him like a bad guy. He kind of is like Brutus. He betrayed Caesar. So I kind of like that because for Abigail, she probably does feel like she's constantly the bad guy, but she knows that there's more to it than that. And I like that the whole idea of like Brutus betraying Caesar, in its own way, they kind of betray Laurent and Cynthia because they decide to go rogue and do their own thing and make it to where Lewis races Clark instead. So that's kind of very much off script and more real. The funny thing is that Laurent and Cynthia kind of trust them that they'll get the job done no matter what, even if they do go off script. So they kind of just prep for it anyway. I like that. I like that Laurent and Cynthia are like, they'll figure it out. We'll be fine. Like that trust is something else. And then she's like, why did he betray him? They say he probably had his own principles. And that, I feel like that ties to them, the two of them deciding to get Lewis involved and being like, I'm sure they had reasons, and Laurent and Cynthia understand that. And Lewis thinks that they're there to kill him, and that's not the case. Makoto's like, no, we talked to Clark about you, and we're like, we want to have a legit race. And then we find about the backstory with him and Sam. It is satisfying to see Sam get strangled a little bit. Not gonna lie. A little bit satisfying. And he's like, I've forgotten about the past. And Makoto's like, well, that's unfortunate. He's like, I don't know about you and Clark or your history or anything like that. He's like, and I don't care. But the important thing in all of this is how you live your life now. And I think that cutting back to Abigail with the camera like on the back of her head, he's like, I don't understand what's happened between you in the past. That's not my business. But what matters is we're in the present. How are you living now? What are you going to do? Like, what can we do now moving forward? That's so good. And then he's like, Clark was disappointed that he couldn't settle things with you. You should feel the same way. You should feel disappointed that you get to settle it either. He's like, you didn't come here for revenge. You wanted to settle things with Clark. And then Abigail's like, even if you race, your past actions won't vanish, just like that burn. Like that scar, like it's a reminder of everything constantly, right? And Lewis just fires it back at her saying, yeah, neither of us will forget as long as we live. He's like, you and I both have a history and a past. He's like, and we're not going to forget it, right? That's going to be our demons we have to live with the rest of our lives. This case got a lot more intimate and serious than I thought it was going to get. And that's not a bad thing. I like that about it. I like how serious it gets. But yeah, so I like that Cynthia, she's a little bit concerned. She's like, a mid-year gift. She's like, and not Nakanoshima is Kim, the one that got him the sake. He's like, we're remodeling for finals. And so Laurent planned all this out with the film and the video and did not tell Cynthia. Interesting. Laurent is the leader of this con group, and he's cautious and plans ahead. So he didn't even tell her about the film. Interesting. Laurent just kind of takes matters into his own hands, doesn't he? And then we see him with the capsule. He's like, I'll toss it so it won't stick up my ass. He's like, I'll just get rid of it. It's fine. And then Abigail, they're like, are you sure you're not going to fly this plane? And I like that Isabel's wearing her hat. That's cute. Isabel's wearing her cap, and she's like, Laurent plays around like this a lot too. So Abigail kind of throws Laurent some shade. She's like, they're like, well, you're not getting in the plane, Abigail? And she's like, Laurent does this shit all the time. It's fine. He'll understand. And he seemingly does. He's seemingly okay with it all. But Lewis getting in the plane, and I love that when he pulls her next to him and talks to him, he tells her that he's sorry. So, and for characters like Abigail and Lewis, for, anybody else, like for Makoto or Cynthia, saying I'm sorry is not a hard thing. But for characters who have so much pride and resentment and self-hatred, saying I'm sorry to someone, it's sincere. Like, it seems like there should have been a lot more said between the two of them. And myself personally, as a character-driven person, I'll be honest, I wanted to see those conversations between Lewis and Abigail play out. I wanted to see them talk it out and go into detail, but that's not this show. But that I'm sorry and her reaction, it hits still like a ton of bricks. So it's just, I get it. I get show what you're doing. It's great. And the fact that Lewis and Clark, I love that Lewis and Clark. Oh my God. It took me 5 episodes to get it. It's Lewis and Clark, the explorers. Oh my God. It took me 5 episodes to make that connection. Wow. Lewis and Clark. Yep. Okay. There we go. I'm sure everybody watching is like, really, this long? But yeah, I love that Clark instantly knew that it was Lewis. He knew it wasn't Abigail. That's cool. Like being able to tell a pilot just by their style of flying. It's great. And Abigail just sitting there praying the whole time that he'll be okay, right? And so then watching the video, and I like Laurent smiling, being like, no matter what happens, I hope both teams had fun. We're going to win either way. I love that he's just like, the fact that he knows that Sam's buying into it and that Sam is taking it seriously and believes it's real. Like, Laurent knows he's getting away with the money. I love it. And then at the end, with the moment that Clark wins and Sam's mad, I was a little confused during the race. I was like trying to process it. Like, wait, Sam's mad, but Clark's winning, so he's going to make his money back. And then you see Clark win. And against the two of them, and Abigail, her being like, okay, like her with her head down, and Clark ends up taking him. And I love that Clark's like, he knew it was him, and Lewis is like, I'm never doing this spontaneous race ever again. This is a one-time deal. But them winning, and Lewis saying, I haven't felt this close to death in a while. Like him saying, like, this was the thrill he's been seeking. And maybe the aerobatics after coming in the army was his way of seeking death without seeking death. Like it was his way of getting close to it without actually going all the way. So yeah, all that makes much more sense, right? I do like in this moment with Makoto and Abigail, Makoto looks taller than Abigail, and I didn't think that he was. And he says, Lewis won our bet. Who knew it'd be such a good race? Like, so Lewis, he bet that Clark was going to win regardless. And then Makoto says, are you still unsatisfied? Oh, I love that shot of him saying apology to her. And she's all leaned up against the wall there. And she shakes her head like, no, I'm not unsatisfied. He's like, you've already forgiven him. And we don't get an answer, but yeah. So the thing about this is that Makoto and Abigail both were like, let's go apologize to Laurent. We've made him lose $25 million, but we're going to go apologize. I'm sure they'll take it well. So there was a little communication disconnect in terms of Makoto and Abigail. They both were like, we're in trouble. We took matters into our own hand. Makoto's like, Abigail's mental health was more important than the money. Good on Makoto. He's like, we'll just go explain to Laurent. He'll be fine with it. He's got a crush on me. It's okay. But what he doesn't know, what Makoto and Abigail do not know, is that Laurent anticipated the worst happening. And so he prepped for it. So the fact that we get the red fireworks and then suddenly they look purple through the window. I thought that they just let off different color fireworks. My brain was not connecting that it was different. Abigail Jones. God, what a close race. And then Sam's like, well, no, that was all of mine. He's like, the results are final. And then he's like, we're going to go find her. And that's when he gets to the crowd and sees that Clark won. He's like, that French bastard! And they just left the sake in the safe. Amazing. And that's when the film starts to come off as Abigail and Makoto get there. And Abigail's like, he really is something else. Like, oh my God, there's a film. And then 3 days before the final is when the video was done and they were getting the film set up. Amazing. And then the red light becomes purple. God. Let's leave that up to them. And so yeah, they're just out there on the boat as Voodoo is like just sitting on all the money. And he's like, who knew what those two would do from the beginning? And so the funny thing is Laurent's like, you never know what's going to happen in a race. He's like, I prepared some insurance. And then I like that Cynthia's like, wonder if those kids are going to get out of there alive. Wonder if they're going to be fine. And Laurent's like, they need to take care of their own mess. I feel like Laurent was like, okay, it's almost like not a punishment, but Laurent knows they're going to get back to him because he trusts Makoto and he trusts Abbie. But I also love the idea that he's like, you know what? They probably did not do things according to script and they probably did their own thing. So they did their own thing. They get to handle their own mess. I love it. I love that Laurent's like, they're adults. They can take care of it. And then the two of them being like, what do we do? And they're like, you can die now or later. You've got 10 seconds. And Abigail's like, well, this is it. We're going to die. I like Makoto's like, are you really going to give up this easily after everything? And Abbie says, living isn't much fun. And Makoto's like, so it needs to be fun? Like, I like that. I was like, he's like, don't you chase thrills? Does it need to just be fun and games all the time? And I love her response to like, she's like, what? And he's like, fine. Then let's try dying together. And she's like, what? And then he shoots the window and they make their escape. And I love that he picks her up. I'm like, Makoto picking her up is amazing. I love that. Look at him. And him jumping out knowing she has the parachute. And she's like, you baka. And then I love that he's like, God, I hope she opens the parachute. I love that there's probably like an inch of Makoto that was like, I'm going to make this bold move and jump out the window with her. And hopefully she's smart enough to like release the parachute. But I'm sure part of him was like, God, if she doesn't, then we're both going to die. Now, I don't know the logistics of if firing off the parachute that at that low of altitude would have actually went off in time. I don't know the logistics of that. Maybe it wouldn't have physically worked, but yeah, I love that they make their escape away from him. And meanwhile, Clark is like happy that he won the race, and they're like, it's probably done for. Or some people will reboot the race and make it more wholesome. Oh. Mm-hmm. And so then, yeah, them on their little yacht boat. I love Isabel coming up next to Lewis. That just the visual elements of this episode are so good. Where Lewis is just sitting there against the plane, and Isabel coming up to him, and there's just hardly any words. She's like, don't you have anything to say? And he thinks about it, and then says, I'm back. And she says, welcome back. I love her going up to him like, look at this little con. This con brought those two back together again. Look at that. I honestly thought there'd be more to Isabel than meets the eye, but when we find out about Sam and him and the con and him knowing about it, the script and everything, and him confronting Sam, it's like, no, Isabel was innocent. I had my radar on her. I was ready for her to be a big old twist in this, and the twist is she really does love him. Look at that. Like, shows me. Shows me up. And then I like that Kim's like, oh yeah, we found the kids. The boy fell somewhere over there. And he's like, oh geez, I guess we should go get them. Laurent, you scoundrel. You tramp. I love the two of them together. And the water there. And she's like, he's like, was that fun? She's like, yes, it was. He's like, I'm glad. He's like, your thrill seeking is too much for me, Abigail. I can't do it. I love it. I love her looking there. And God, I love that look on her face. I want to get a shot of that. That's just, the fact that she smiles genuinely for like the first time since who knows when. Oh, that's so good. I love it. And then that's the episode. That was so good. I was really pleased with that. I had been wondering this whole time, the last several episodes, I'm like, how are they pulling off this con? How are they convincing Sam? How are they getting out with the money? How are they all going to converge? Because everybody seemed to be doing their own storylines in this. And Makoto and Abigail were doing their thing. Laurent and Cynthia were doing their thing. And then it all came together in the end. Lewis was able to like say that he's back with Isabel. Abigail, what I like about it is Abigail has not completely changed her tune, but she's opened up more to Makoto, and their friendship has kind of blossomed from this. I was like, I love that. I love that so much. So, really good stuff, right? Really, really good stuff. So, it's wonderful. But y'all, that was the end of this case. So, episode 11, my theory, as it has been since last episode, is that we're going to have episodes 11, 12, 13, 14, and 15 dealing with, I think, Cynthia next. I think she's our next person to crack. Because we know virtually nothing about Cynthia. But Laurent is our main guy who's the leader of all this. It would make sense if we bookended with Makoto and Laurent. My question is, I think we're going to do Cynthia next. After that, are we going to do Laurent for 16, 17, 18, 19, 20? Or are we going to do like a lead up with him and have the last 5 episodes, or have him in the last 5 of Makoto and Laurent together? I don't know. I don't know what we're going to do, but I really enjoy this series, and I'm very, very excited to see what all we are going to get in the next case. So, as always, I'm really excited to hear your thoughts down below. I hope you all enjoyed this reaction and discussion, but man, what a good conclusion to this case. Short, sweet, and to the point, as it should be. So, I hope you all have a wonderful week. Please stay safe, take care, and yeah, I'll be back very soon with more of The Great Pretender. Bye.